Now let's get into malnutrition, because this is the sad looking stuff. Again, here in the States, protein intake is not an issue. Okay, consumption of animal products, not an issue. We get plenty of protein. And we just saw in the last slide, we get 15% well within AMDR. So when we come to protein malnutrition, it's going to be more of a world issue, third world issue. But excessive protein intake, which we typically do see within the Western diet, American diet, okay, that is associated with heart disease, colorectal cancer, diabetes. Just the consumption of red meat has been associated with cancers. Not every type of cancer, pancreatic, stomach, esophageal. So there is a lot of data to suggest, if you're one of these carnivore diet people, high amounts do have issues. Okay? So if you are somebody who consumes an excessive amount of high protein consumption, animal consumption, red meat consumption, take a little bit of it out, man. Add a serving. Have a nice little salad, okay? Your bowels will thank you. The book goes into high protein diets and how they're potentially bad. Okay? If you do have a high amount of protein consumption, there is a little bit of loss of calcium. The fizz behind it is kind of complex. It just can happen a little bit, right? So you do have an excretion of calcium that happens, which is leached off of the bones. Which, again, if I lose calcium in the bones, that leads to osteoporosis. Those two go hand in hand. And that's just thinning of the bones. We'll talk about that when we look at calcium, when we talk about the minerals. When we consume protein, that's going to lead to dehydration. There's a greater draw in of water into the digestive tract to try to process this. And in a lot of studies that are very old, it was shown to lead to a lot of excess wear and tear on the kidneys. Okay, so it resulted in poor kidney health. That's why it's always suggested, if you have kidney disease, you should not have a high protein based diet. Okay, because the kidneys have to filter out that urea, more stress, more strain, because more work by the kidneys, and that can lead to more kidney damage. Those studies are pretty old. I want to say around 50 years old, 40 years old, something like that. And there's been some interesting studies that have started to come out over the last several years looking at kidney function. Okay. This is a pretty interesting one. And when did this come out? Oh, I didn't write it down. This one's within the last few years, last couple of years. I can't remember off the top of my head. This may have been last year for all I can remember at this point in my life. Okay. But it looked at kidney function. And it looked at between people with kidney issues and people with not kidney issues, high consumption and what that actually caused for the stress and strain. And I put the conclusion down here from the study. If you're interested, you can click on it there and go to it, or I can give you the PubMed ID. If my links aren't working properly, I can give you the PubMed ID and an announcement if you're curious. But it looked at high protein diets and saw that actually when kidney damage is occurring, more structure is being torn down, destroyed, right? So they're going to actually, those kidneys are going to need a little bit more protein to help repair those structures that have been destroyed. So it looked at the glomerular filtration rate when it came to high protein diets. They did that and started looking at individuals who were not healthy, had a kidney dysfunction, and people with normal kidneys, there was actually, as you can kind of see, not a huge adverse effect when it came to furthering the destruction of kidneys. The initial studies for this done, 40, 50 years ago, like I said, were very kind of limited in their scope. They had a lot of potential drawbacks when it came to some of the all the various different setup of the test, of the exams and whatnot for that study. So there's a lot of holes in it, a lot of variables that they just didn't think about. And all of these studies coming out now, and there's been at least 10 or so, I think off the top of my head, 6, 10, something like that, looking at all of these type of studies here. And this is a meta-analysis, so it just takes all the studies that have been done and puts it in one format here. Actually, high protein consumption, if you have a kidney disease, has not been shown to have any more adverse effects than having a low to normal protein diet if you had a kidney dysfunction. So why is that? The body adapts. The body adapts all the time. Your metabolism changes at different points of your life. The body adapts to what you do. Okay? Here, the body adapts. Okay? What we think, because of that one study 50 damn years ago, when you have better scientific methods to study that now, you can kind of see that there is no adverse effect. There is no excessive wear and tear on those kidneys, as we once thought. The kidneys need more protein to build that structure that has been destroyed and damaged. So they're going to utilize that much more effectively, those nitrogen components, that protein, those amino acids, to build the structures, and they're not going to have to filter it because they're going to keep it inside and utilize it inside their cells instead of secreting it in the urine. Okay. So there is a lot of interesting new studies out there looking at actually high protein doesn't cause kidney damage like we once thought it did. If you're interested, click on the study here. Again, the PubMed ID, I can throw it out to you if my link doesn't work. But it's not like we once thought it was. Again, the only way we see protein deficiencies here in the States, generally it's overconsumption. The only way we see deficiency here in the States is if, alcoholism, an eating disorder, anorexia. There's some intestinal tract disorders, but you don't eat, okay? Elderly. Generally, that's the population that are highest at risk. Fixed income, it's either pay for all 15 different medications or eat. They pay for the meds. Okay. Failure to thrive. Okay. Abuse situations with infants, toddlers. Okay. That's where you would see a protein deficiency. Where we see is much more third world countries. Okay. Where we have a lack of food, so it's a global undernutrition for everything, carbs, fats, protein, everything. And in your third world countries, your poorer nations, that's where we're going to see these protein deficiencies. So again, not really common at all. The two examples that I give on the next couple slides, yes, okay. Africa, third world countries here. And it's usually referred to as a protein energy malnutrition. These are the pictures. Okay. Here we see marasmus, and this is Koshwash core. Marasmic Koshwash core is what they call it now, though. Okay, but it's basically Koshwash core. those are both malnutrient in protein. You can see we can have one has a very specific hallmark, one has a very specific hallmark, because it's based on a few different aspects. So let's go back after we have that depressing image in our head. All right. Koshwash core. That's how you pronounce that. This is undernutrition as a whole. Adequate energy, but insufficient protein, or insufficient high quality protein. Generally, it's just insufficient protein. Okay. In these third world countries, they don't have a lot of safe sex practices, so there's a lot of births, right? A lot of pregnancies. This occurs when the older child who was once breastfed is no longer being breastfed. They need to get food, and they're going to get food. They're just not receiving sufficient amounts of food. And so that's where you get this not receiving quality protein, if at all. They were once consuming enough calories, being breastfed. Now they're not. And now they're not getting the requisite amount. Again, whenever we see protein being deficient, we're always going to have slowed, stunted growth. You see a pretty significant amount of edema, especially within the belly. Okay. Remember, what were one of the functions that we said way back at the beginning? They help to suck that fluid back into the blood vessels, into the capillary, instead of keeping that fluid within the tissues. And that's what you see here. There's your super distended belly. Okay. I mean, everything else is rail thin, but that belly is distended. Okay. This is showing pitting edema. This is pitting edema. You just push their thumb into their skin there, and push it into yours, and it bounces right back. Okay. Here with excessive fluid within there, you depress all that, and that fingerprint stays there. Okay. And eventually it'll go back to normal. But that's pitting edema right there. Okay. So there are a couple major things that are associated, a couple of major symptoms associated with Koshwash core. Marasmus is starvation. No pitting edema, skin and bones kind of appearance, loss of subcutaneous fat. We're in starvation mode here. Right? Very weak, very thin, not a lot of energy, not expending energy. The body has changed their metabolism here to try to slow the person down so they can survive. Marasmic Koshwash core is like Koshwash core. Okay. Marasmic Koshwash core is Koshwash core. But they each have a distinct, different view. I don't necessarily ask this as an essay question. It'll just be a series of multiple choice type questions. Skin and bones appearance, pitting edema, very swollen, distended abdomen. Complete lack of food overall. Lack of food, yes, as you can kind of see, pretty young. Getting some calories, not sufficient, and definitely not a good quality protein, if at all. Sad. So that's